going to talk a little bit about analyzing poetry today. And we're going to use the hollow men because you guys have worked with this a little bit before. One of the ways of trying to figure out poetry is by organizing it in something called 4 quadrants. Basically, you're going to take out a piece of paper. You're going to divide your paper into 4 parts. Your first quadrant is images. What images show up in the poem? And we're going to just focus on the first stanza here, so just this first part to make it a little bit easier. But when you're doing it for a poem, generally you look at the whole poem. The second quadrant is for other senses. Not stuff you see, but if there are sense or touch or any of your other 5 senses. I keep going back and forth over what to call this quadrant, but it's basically like the meaning. What are the main ideas? Let's call it that. And your last quadrant is keywords and phrases, and here you would actually quote from the poem. So let's take a look at the hollow men. Start with images. What images do you see in this poem? In this first stanza?
It's like dark mist, like it's just like after like everything's like destroyed, it's kind of like just dark.
Do you see that actually in here? Can you show me it in this first stanza? Where here is the dark mist? This is what I'm saying. Like we're working through this together so that you get a sense for what goes where. Okay, the dark mist would be something that you'd put maybe in main ideas, right? The things that seem significant to you. In the images section, it should be pictures that are actually described, images that are actually in the poem. What about other senses? What you're looking for are things that you can actually taste, smell, touch, and hear that are described in the poem. So like the images, pictures, the other senses, it needs to be things that are actually in the poem. Tastes, touches, smells. And I'm not saying that we're done with this section, but I want us to move on so that you've got an idea of what to do. Tastes, touch, smells, sounds. Thank you. Okay, we're going to skip over the purpose, the main ideas part, and we're going to look at the keywords or phrases. What are some of the important quotes, words or phrases in this poem? Here, you're quoting from the poem, so it actually needs to go in quotation marks. And you write it exactly as it is. So remember us, hyphen, if at all, hyphen, not as lost. And for the purposes of showing you something, I'm going to go on to the next part, not as lost violent souls. You put a slash like this to show that there's a line break there, and then you write violent souls. You end your quotation mark. You can do ... to show that the line isn't finished. End your quotation mark, and you need to put the line number. So if we go here, on the poems that have been published in books, usually you've got lines every 5. So line 10 is here. So 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16. So you would go LN for line, 15-16, in parentheses after the quote. That way you can go and find it again later. And this is particularly useful in a really long poem. What other quotes from this poem, what other words or phrases are there that are really important, do you think, here? Make sure that you spell it correctly. You spell it the way it is in the book. So I spell color because I'm Canadian. I spell color with a U. But if you look here, it's actually C-O-L-O-R. They spell it the American way. T.S. Eliot was American. So I need to actually put it in as it was written. I've got my comma before my slash. Slash shows that that's where the line breaks. Capitalized P because it's capitalized in the poem. My end quotation mark. And what is the line? The semicolon, the dot and comma. You don't have to put that because it's not, that is a marker to show that you are continuing. That's why I put the dot, 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 to show that this actually hasn't finished, but the part that I want has finished. So I don't include that last punctuation mark. There are probably 2 more phrases, short phrases, that I would put in this keywords of phrases for the first stanza. So this is quotes from the poem. We'll talk a little bit later about figuring out, choosing the quotes and then figuring out what they mean. But for now, I just want you to select the ones that you think are important. So our last section here is the main ideas. Here you're not quoting from the poem, you're kind of paraphrasing. So what is this first stanza talking about? Based on it's not exactly what you think, but it's not, it's not necessarily what the author thinks either. Based on the poem, based on what we talked about yesterday, what are hollow men? What do you think hollow men are? Do they have to be dead? Do you think? Or they maybe, or do they have, are they hollow? Like when it says people without souls, we can mean that in the literal sense as in a dead person, but we can also mean that in the sense of a person who, not necessarily evil exactly, but who's doing things that maybe aren't right because they have no soul. So which one, what do we think? So we've got the 2 senses here. We've got the sense of dead or just soulless, kind of bad. So what other main ideas are there in this part? Looking at our keywords or phrases, this is why we did this first. What do you think? Shape without form, shade without color, paralyzed forth, gesture without motion. What's going on there? Let's look at just one of those. Shape without form. How can you have shape without form?
Zombie ghost.
But if you have a shape, it has a form, right? A circle has a form. Yeah.
It's like a sheet, but it's not a regular form. So like form is almost like a regular, like a circle or a square, but it's got weird random lines going everywhere.
Okay. What about shade without color? How can you have shade without color? Seb? Okay. Yeah.
I'm thinking like there's on the face there's like some color, and on the arms there's another color, but it all blends together to look like a color, and it's not.
But there's no color. It's without color. Yeah.
Maybe it's like someone who's dead, so they're like really pale and don't have any color.
How do they have shade then?
They could be like gray.
Okay. So maybe what these are saying are like paralyzed force. Paralyzed means you can't move. Force requires movement. To have force, you have to be able to push, right? Gesture without motion. How do you make a gesture without moving?
Using mind.
So what you have here in this section, you have a bunch of contradictory things, contradictory ideas.
So like opposites almost.
Yeah, let's call them opposites. And with these opposites, what they're trying to do is give, from what you're saying, like with the shade particularly, like the sense of gray. There's shade, but there's no actual color. So it's like things are washed out. They're not quite real.
Are you to tell us what this poem is about?
No,
Ever?
probably not.
What about the end of the year?
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe, if you ask me then.
Someone put it on the board.
Okay. I'm going to go back to what we said last day. We were talking about the poem being about death. So that would be a main idea in here. So this section is the major ideas that are supported by quotes from the poem. Like your keywords or phrases.